So, I read the new Chainsaw Man chapter, and I didn't really like it very much, which I'm sure is a very hot take, um, going on Twitter and such, and being in my own Discord server. But I kind of wanted to talk about it, because I haven't done a Chainsaw Man video in a while, and some of the reasons I really don't care for this chapter are in relation to that. So, those of you who followed the channel for a long time know that I started reading Chainsaw Man around the time we got into the third act of part one, right around the end of the International Assassins arc. And I loved it. I still love Chainsaw Man Part 1. I think it was fantastic. It took a character who, on a very surface level, is very bland and kind of annoying, the typical pervert trope character, and actually did some fairly interesting introspective stuff with a character who has not had a normal upbringing, who is not socially adjusted, who does not have an understanding of intimacy and human connection, and then is also dealing with the hormones of being a teenager, and then gets thrown into the most traumatizing, unnatural situations imaginable. You then combine that with a lot of other characters who feel like people, who are actually somewhat believably written, given the setting that they're placed in. And you end up creating a story that I, and a lot of other people obviously, found to be very compelling. We then get to Chainsaw Man Part 2, which starts off with this, in my opinion. When we were focusing more on Asa, the early focus on Asa was great. Fujimoto did a great job establishing her character, sort of distinguishing her from Denji, making her internal thought processes and the way that she reacted to different situations around her believable. It made her very likable. I was kind of liking her even more than Denji, especially with the way that Denji was introduced in part 2. Not introduced. His introduction was quite great, fighting the cockroach devil. I'm pretty sure that's what he was fighting. But the issue was how Fujimoto decided to address the things that happened at the end of part 1 and Denji's character development going from there into part 2. And that he really didn't seem to be all that interested in doing that. Outside of the one brief flashbang he experienced during the Falling Devil arc, which, is ironically when part 2 really started to fall off, there has been essentially zero acknowledgement of all of the people that mattered to Denji that he has lost. And instead, Fujimoto has focused almost entirely on Denji's issues with intimacy and his sexuality, which is not inherently bad, because that's still a core part of Denji's character. Although I do wish we focused more on him losing his family and the previous normal life that he kind of thought he had, and how that has affected him in the normal life that he's trying to create now with Nayuta. But, we put more focus on the sex thing, the desire for attention and adoration as being Chainsaw Man, and we seemingly make Denji, or no. No, the fault doesn't really lie in Denji. Fujimoto seems to be allergic to having Denji really develop. After we introduced, what the hell was her name again? Fumiko? I hate her so much. When we get the fake out of Denji having character development, after everything that happened to him in part 1, that was not really a good sign. It almost seems like Fujimoto's like, were you expecting Denji to have some character development? Psych! He's only going to become more of a caricature of himself, which is also one of my larger complaints about the cast of Part 2 in general. A lot of the good character writing from Part 1 just seems to not be here anymore. I'm gonna chalk up a lot of that to the dialogue, which just kind of feels worse than it ever used to be. A lot of the lines the characters say just make me cringe in a way that they didn't in Part 1. I don't know if that's just a translation thing or not, but I don't remember it being like this at the start of Part 2. I don't know if he's hamming it up or whatnot. Maybe he's trying to make some kind of point with the characters seeming like caricatures of themselves, but it's not remotely making for a very interesting or engaging week-to-week reading experience, which is a major contributing factor to why I haven't really been reading it week to week anymore, and why I stopped doing videos on it, in addition to the fact that the pacing of Part 2 has been kind of terrible, largely due to the release schedule. But I don't think the release schedule that Fujimoto's chosen for himself is necessarily bad. It's just the content he decides to put in the chapters paired up with the release schedule, it's just not good. We'll go weeks of getting chapters where, like, nothing happens. Not really anything happens. That was the big stretch after the Falling Devil arc. Even in parts of Falling Devil, where there would be, some action happening, but nothing really substantive happening. You'd wait 2 weeks for a chapter that you'd read in 2 minutes, in which there wouldn't really be any sort of character development or any significant contributions to the narrative. It would just be, 7 double-page spreads of a building falling over, and then I'll see you again in another 2 weeks. Not good pacing at all. And that's just sort of continued. We've just gotten a really long stretch of chapters in which it feels like not much of real importance has happened. There are some things of importance, but the way that they're portrayed, the way that they're framed, doesn't really give them much impact. They don't feel very important. Everything just sort of happens, gets played off as not being super serious. Like the whole Denji retrieval thing, that didn't really feel like anything to me. I was just like, oh, okay, they're doing this now. Alright, okay. I don't know if that's reflective of my lack of investment due to what's been happening in Part 2, or if that is just reflective of something changing with the writing, which is the cause of my lessened investment. And then we get to this chapter, which has some terrible dialogue. Just fucking awful. And then we get, 10 pages of a gratuitous alleyway handjob and makeout scene, and then an Evangelion reference at the end of it. Perhaps, possibly, if the big stretch of Part 2 leading up to this felt better, if it was better, if it was a bit more impactful, if it was a bit better written, if a better job had been done on making the characters compelling and interesting and enjoyable to read, this would have hit somewhat well. Because there are plenty of examples in Part 1 of characters being in really awkward, really fucked up situations. There are plenty of examples of that in Part 2 as well. But they were handled well. I felt like the lead up to them made those moments feel earned. It was what made them impactful in a way that I liked. Even if the impact, if the emotional response was not positive, I went, damn, Fujimoto did a really good job at making this hurt. That's not really the case here. I just get to this and I go, after so much mid happening for so long, what do we get this? A shock chapter of technically 2 minors getting sexually assaulted at the same time? Okay, I don't care anymore. I care enough to make a video talking about why I don't care anymore, because, you know, I understand some people are interested in my opinion on it, and I like talking about things I have opinions on, but I just really can't bring myself to care about what happens in Chainsaw Man anymore, because it's just not good anymore. It's just really mid. Just the characters aren't as good anymore. The way that the conflicts are structured and play out is just not interesting to follow, at least not in a week-to-week format with varying breaks in between chapters. This isn't like a deal-breaker chapter. Like, if I was reading all of Part 2 and was thoroughly enjoying it, and then this chapter came out, this isn't something that would make me go, ooh, Fujimoto, what the fuck is wrong with you? I can't read this anymore, like Twitter people. Because I haven't been enjoying Part 2. I get to this and I'm like, oh, so this is what we're doing now. Okay. This is less like a big, shocking betrayal to me, the reader, and it's more like a final nail in the coffin. I've been reading Part 2 since it started. I really liked it at the beginning, and then you just really lost me after a certain point. It just really dragged, the plot became less interesting, the characters became less compelling, and then this just happens, and I think is not very well done for what the emotional response to it is supposed to be. I just don't care for it. And I'm really not interested in seeing what happens after the fact. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Chainsaw Man Chapter 167. Yeah, I think that was 167. I don't even care what numbers they have anymore. I'm just not interested. So sorry, Fujimoto. You gave me a great time with Part 1 and early Part 2. It was a series that really hit home with me. I really enjoyed it. But now, after all this time, I just don't care anymore. And I think that's a damn shame.